Hey fam, welcome or welcome back. Tisha here, back for another chapter reading of Stolen Innocence by Elisa Wall. Go ahead and do me a favor and hit the like button as we jump into chapter 3. Oh, I got all my goodies out. Ooh. Good priesthood children. Your family must be united. Reuben Jeffs. In the weeks immediately following Mother Laura's arrival in October 1995, the tension in the house had for the most part subsided. We cleared one of my sister's bedrooms on the lower level to make room for our new mother. And at the start, we were all on our best behavior. Mother Laura's entry into our lives came at a time when many things in the Wall house were changing. In the span of a few months, my sisters Cassandra, Sabrina, and Michelle were all married according to the prophet's revelation. Cassandra, at 19 years old, joined Rachel. Okay, so we definitely know that Rachel is Rebecca. So when you hear that, think Rebecca. As one of the many wives of Rulon Jeffs, who by that point was 83, while Sabrina was married to a member of the FLDS community in Canada, Michelle stayed closer to home, marrying Uncle Rulon's son Seth. All of my sisters had been over the age of 18 at the time of their marriages, and Dad had been chastised for keeping them in the house so long. But my father just wanted to give his girls the opportunity to grow up. Now, that is one thing that I will say, that they were significantly older than the ages that we normally hear. But we know that that didn't last because at some point we know what's going to happen to Elisa. Of these departures, Michelle's hit me the hardest. She had the gentlest soul and of anyone in my family, and had always looked out for me, comforting me when I was sick, making sure that my hair was combed and that I was dressed neatly and appropriately. There were so many children in the Wall household, and as the 19th, I sometimes fell through the cracks. That's part of the one of the things that I don't like about having so many children. I'm not saying that because both of my parents come from large families. So I'm not saying that you can't have households where all the kids' needs are met. I just feel like that it's not a large number, because if you talk to a bunch of kids who were raised in a home, they often will tell you that there were times where they felt like their emotional needs weren't met, or where their parent wasn't here because they were busy with this one, etc., etc. Add to that the fact that you have multiple children with multiple wives. That's a whole nother story. And I feel like the Browns are a perfect example of how that's not always the case. But Michelle made every effort to ensure that didn't happen. She was like a second mother to me. For the eldest sisters in the home to help with the care of the little ones was a common practice for families of the FLDS. Mom had 13 children of her own still living in the home, and with Audrey up and out early to teach at Alta Academy, leaving most of the domestic duties falling on Mom's shoulders, she needed to have Michelle, Cassandra, and Sabrina around to provide us extra attention. Of course, nothing compared to Mom's healing touch, but in many ways, Michelle had become another anchor for me. Losing her was unthinkable. I cried right up until the day of the wedding, begging her not to go away. With all these changes in the family, it was beginning to feel like our house had a revolving door with people constantly coming in and going out. However, though we lost many of my older sisters that year, we had gained a mother, and there was hope in that new relationship. I looked to Mom for advice on how to welcome Mother Laura. She had grown up knowing and wanting this lifestyle, but I now understand that our years of turmoil had made many of us skeptical about what her arrival would do to the already touchy atmosphere in our household. Mom had endured years of compromising as she tried to pattern this home after the one she grew up in. Endured. We've heard that before. I know that she had obeyed her priesthood head as she was directed, but over the years she'd grown increasingly disheartened at the way her relationship with her sister wife and husband had affected her children. Mom's firm religious convictions reminded her to hold her tongue and keep sweet. I just can't be a part of a religion that tells me to hold my tongue and keep sweet. Don't speak on the things that are being done to you, the things that hurt you, the things that are right, the things that you have an opinion about. Instead, shut your mouth and don't say anything, because if you do, some man's going to be upset about it. I admired how she welcomed Mother Laura with open arms. Seeing her embrace our new mother made me hopeful that this new element in the equation would balance our home out. Because Laura's age was close to that of my older sister, I felt optimistic about the prospect of forming a bond with her like the one I shared with them. At first, this seemed possible. Mother Laura and I had lots of fun playing games with some of my other siblings. Her present her presence helped to alleviate some of the emptiness I'd felt since my sister's departures. But I watched helplessly as it soon became worse than before. Mom's gentle personality and unwavering commitment to her faith were no match for the others in the home. It distressed me to see the lonely look in her eyes as she tried to keep the pieces together and shield her younger children from a repeat of the past. But by the end of that first month, the newness of having Mother Laura in the house had begun to wear off. It was quickly becoming clear that Dad's third wife had her own unique set of expectations and would present certain challenges. She was yet another person who wanted things done her way. We'd seen glimmers of that stubborn side during family get togethers, but her desire to take charge held a different significance now that she was part of our household. While Laura's presence was problematic in itself, it served to aggregate another long simmering tension in the family involving my 21-year-old brother, Craig. Is that Cole? I can't remember. I hate that she's using different names. As he came of age, my oldest brother from my mother had finally been able to quiet some of the tension between the mothers and the children in our home. But adding Laura to the family had again made the equation unbalanced. It was not long after she arrived that old feuds were rekindled. She and Mother Audrey quickly became friends, and their newly formed bond seemed to have the two women pitted against Mom and her children. I wonder what she saw in the third wife that they were okay, but she had a problem with the second. Like, what was it that made their mom an outlier? Was it because they were jealous of her beauty and her talent? Was it because of the amount of kids that she had? Like, why did her mom get treated so differently? Seeing his mother and younger siblings being improperly treated as he'd once been forced Craig to step in and do what he could. Okay, what? Seeing his mother and younger siblings being improperly treated as he'd once been forced Craig to step in and do what he could. I don't understand that sentence. We were still recovering from losing three of our sisters, and it had been hard for my mother's children, especially Craig. I think there was supposed to be a comma, like seeing his mother and the younger siblings being improperly treated as he'd once been forced Craig to step in and do what he could do. That's exactly y'all. Commas matter. Sorry, I had to reread it again because it was bothering me that it didn't register with me. Okay. We were still recovering from losing three of our sisters, and it had been hard for my mother's children, especially Craig. In conversations with Craig since, I have come to see that my brother, like most young men his age, had long been contemplating what he had been taught growing up. He found the many aspects of our religion had glaring discrepancies and didn't make sense or feel right. Craig possessed a fiery intelligence and a quick mind. When he was still a high school student at Alta Academy, he had begun to examine aspects of our religion in his quest to gain a deeper understanding of our faith. Uncle Warren didn't seem to like Craig because he wasn't just another sheep willing to follow the flock. He was an enthusiastic student, and in priesthood history, he often asked pointed questions that would back Warren into a corner in front of the whole class. While he was eagerly trying to understand how the teachings in our culture all fit together, Warren was threatened by my brother's inquisitiveness and labeled him as trouble because Warren is fearful of intelligence. He wants to be the smartest person in the room. And he has this gift, like a lot of predators do, of seeing who he can take advantage of and who he can't. And he saw that he was going to be one of the ones he was going to have trouble with, much like he saw one of her sisters to also be trouble. The two often clashed. Warren seemed to single out Craig and watch for any misstep he made. He always ready to chastise him and often made an example of him in front of his classmates. One particularly shame inducing consequence for acting out in school was to have your father called in, and Warren was not afraid to subject the students to that humiliation. Warren's attitude toward Craig and many of my siblings seemed to come not just from displeasure with their behavior, but from a larger, more fundamental problem with the Wall family. It was almost as though he felt threatened by us. Yeah, because your dad's smart. Now, not smart enough to not follow this man, but he's smart. The fact that many in my family were smart, strong willed, and unafraid to ask questions when things did not feel right made it hard to keep a tight hold on us. Warren didn't like having to deal with disobedience and questions concerning the priesthood. Our religion left no room for logical reasoning and honest questioning. Warren made no attempt to understand or tolerate any of this, deeming it as absolute rebellion. By the time Craig was 21, doors had been opened and he began to objectively examine our culture. He was still a believer, but was growing skeptical. He had lost trust and faith in the church and its leaders because he was having trouble reconciling the way they were teaching to the way in which they were conducting their actual lives. Seeing our sisters get placed for marriage to men who were so much older than they were only confirmed for Craig that there were many unjust and illogical elements to the FLDS belief system. In particular, the marriage of our half sister Andrea disturbed him. Andrea had wed Larry Steed, who was also married to Mother Audrey's daughter, Jean. Because Jean was one of the oldest girls in our family, the younger children were not close to her, and Andrea feared that life in the new home would be difficult. Before her marriage, we all worried about the prophet's revelation that she should marry Larry. We were skeptical that the union would make her happy, and doubt began to swirl that the placement had truly been God's will, because it wasn't. This is all the will of a man. Though Craig had been raised to see Andrea's placement as a revelation from God, he questioned more than ever the arrangement. At the time, he worried that Larry and others had contrived the marriage and suspected it had little to do with any divine inspiration. He was coming to question the most fundamental aspect of our way of life, divine revelations from God regarding placement marriage. A thought like this went against everything we knew, but with no further outlet for his questions, Craig continued to struggle inwardly. When Mother Laura moved in, his internal debate began to bubble over in noticeable ways, and he was sometimes confrontational. It wasn't just about how Mother Laura behaved. Her presence was a constant reminder that the church's values were flawed and that plural marriage was not working in our home. Laura had a forceful personality, a trait that combined with Audrey's similar personality seemed to drown out our mother. So it was a bunch of Marys. Shout out to Mary Brown. There were a bunch of women who were stern in the way that they address things, and their mother wasn't like that. Their mother was more like Christine, is what it sounded like. I was too young to really know what was going on or see the dynamic, but I could tell that Craig's concern only grew as he came to feel that mom was not being treated properly. Looking back, I wonder if a lot of the fights may have arisen because neither dad nor Audrey knew how to live in plural marriage. Even if you're raised in plural marriage and have a model for it, it's difficult to make it work, to know when to compromise, when to complain, and when to involve the father. If you're not careful, minor scuffles can snowball into ugly conflicts. Since Audrey grew up in a monogamous family, it seemed hard for her to take a consolatory tone. And with that addition of Laura's assertiveness, my mother's needs frequently got lost in the fray. My mother's background only made things more complicated because she knew all too well that plural marriage, with all its eccentricities, could work under the right circumstances. Mom had been raised in a household that was held up as the ideal plural family, where the mothers got along and all the kids truly saw one another as siblings. Mom embraced her FLDS and the FLDS teaching in regard to women and desired a peaceful household. As it wasn't mom's way to engage in fights with the other women in the house, she would often retreat instead of getting in the middle and making things worse. Everyone on mom's side felt that dad should stand up for her more, and we were upset when he allowed the more forceful wives to take charge. The situation failed to improve with time. Craig, being my mother's oldest son, took on the responsibility of advocating for her and her children when no one else would. When his conflicts with mothers Audrey and Laura escalated, my father was often pulled in, leading to contention between him and Craig. Some fights got so heated that they turned physical. I had always seen my dad as an even tempered and reasonable man, but now it was slowly beginning to show that he was consumed by the situation and having trouble controlling his feelings. It appeared that in Dad's mind, Craig was affecting the other boys in the home and tainting their beliefs. And in trying to solve this problem, he was losing his grip on our family and on himself. Why do we always excuse men's behavior? Why is it that it just can't be said that her father didn't stick up for his kids the way that he should, that he allowed his feelings for certain women to overpower what was going on in his household? I understand that this is a cult, but she said it herself. They weren't raised in this. His father was not raised in this. He converted to this, which reminds me even more so, like, you can believe it, but like at what point? I don't know, y'all. I struggle with this. Let me get back. Dad tried to address the family's dissension during our regular Sunday school lessons in the living room. As our priesthood head, he was in charge of educating his children on our religion and its principles. Everyone, even the mothers, was expected to attend Sunday lessons. Typically, the kids fought for a seat on one of the two couches. Whoever didn't get a seat on the couch got relegated to the floor. Dad was a stickler for punctuality, and the lessons began promptly at 10 a.m., usually with a reading from the Book of Mormon or the Bible. The lessons usually lasted about an hour, during which Dad would select one or two of us to stand and bear witness while he sat on the couch in front of the big windows. I could always tell when he was about to raise the family issues because he'd begin talking about the United Order, a teaching that stressed the importance of oneness and reinforced the other teachings we'd been hearing our entire lives. He said we couldn't attain it in our home without complete harmony in the family. Ideal FLDS children were expected to be humble, faithful servants of their priesthood head and the prophet. Be humble servants of your dad, of the man, and the prophet, another man. Nobody else matters but the men. Oh, and bear us children, but the men. That meant that the daughters needed to quit arguing, the mothers needed to stop fighting, and we all needed to keep sweet and keep the spirit of God. Unfortunately for him, his words seemed to be falling on deaf ears, and they did little to quell the growing unrest. While I believe my father tried not to point fingers, by my perception, it appeared that Dad was always singling Craig out as the cause of our family problems. Of course, because he is very knowledgeable and he is inquisitive and he is questioning things. And how dare he do that to the priesthood holder? So he's gonna gun for the one who's holding him accountable. I was just a couple of months into school's fall session when Dad made a fateful pronouncement. Craig was to be out of the house by November 1st, 1996. Since he was over 18, it was considered too late to send him away to reform, as was customarily done in cases such as this. Instead, instead, Dad just wanted him to leave. I will never forget the day that Craig asked Mom if she could drive him to the highway where he could hitchhike out of the area. Some of us younger kids piled into Mom's little brown Buick sedan to join her for the ride and say goodbye to our older brother. The hour-long drive was mostly quiet, and our silence said everything about the sadness and fear we felt. My sister Teresa was taking it the hardest. She had become very close to Craig, and now he was one more person leaving our lives. With little money in his pocket and raw emotional wounds, Craig set off to find his own answers to his many questions. I could barely watch him get out of our car and walk away. The final image I had of my brother Craig is with a backpack strapped to him and a sign reading Denver in his hand. Do you know how dangerous that is? It's just so scary to think of all the different lost boys, right? Not just the ones that ran away, but the ones that were kicked out, and knowing that this is what they turn to, that he's holding a sign on a street saying where it is that he desires to go to, in hopes that he's not only picked up, but that he's not harmed along the way, with very little limited knowledge to what goes on outside, because he's been in this close community all this time. It's sad. Years later, my mom would tell me that leaving Craig by the side of the road that day was one of the most painful things she ever had to do. At the time, though, she was silent as any perfect FLDS wife should be. Casting out her son was her duty. She could not object, and if she did, her opinion would not matter. She had to follow the orders of her husband. That was the command of the church, and she obeyed it no matter how much pain it caused her. I would like to think, if the roles were reversed and if I were in this type of situation, that I would go with my child. But I also have to remember that in a lot of these cases, they would hold your other kids hostage. So I don't even know what that would look like. I can't fathom it. What do y'all think? Like, do you guys think that you would be able to leave with all your kids? I feel like I'd be one of those people causing a ruckus where they would want to get me out of there with all my kids, because the way that I would be alerting authorities to the crap that was going on in there, I would like to think that I would go. Okay. Even so, it took her several minutes to find the strength to shift the car and to drive. As we wound down the gray asphalt of the highway heading home, I watched tears trace the soft skin of my mother's face. She was still beautiful, but in that moment, she became a shadow of her former self. She had lost her eldest son, her protector. It was a wound that would never completely heal. I saw Teresa beside her, hands folded stiffly in her lap and her pained eyes staring into space. She had just watched her dear friend and brother walk away and did not know if she would ever see him again. I wanted so badly to reach up from the back seat and hug both of them, to offer the only form of consolation that I, as a 10-year-old child, could provide, but I knew better. The best and only option was to keep my mouth closed. It was not until many years later that any of us heard from Craig. He purposely avoided reaching out to our family for fear of further affecting his younger sisters and brothers. Over time, I came to understand his choice to put distance between himself in our family, but back then I thought of him frequently, which would always make me feel a bit sad and discouraged. I didn't really understand the concept of questioning, but I felt sympathy for the way things had turned out between Craig and my dad. I was not alone in my concern for him, but I kept my pain to myself. It was not something to be spoken of. At home, I noticed a marked change in my mother. She seldom sang or hummed around the house anymore, and she began to look drained somehow, older. A general sadness permeated the household and made me miss Michelle all the more. I wished so dearly that I could hold on to my mother as I had once done with Michelle. Without my nurturing older sister around, I had no one to make me feel safe in the unrest that had taken over our home and irreparably changed our lives. In the weeks after Craig's departure, a pall set over the house, and even Mother Laura's pregnancy and impending delivery didn't lift the mood. Having Craig leave was even hard for Dad, but he hoped it would bring our family's turbulence to an end. Dad had been optimistic that without their older brother's brooding influence, the younger children would fall back into line. Instead, some of them began to exhibit their anger at having lost so many older siblings. Yeah, I don't understand why you think that kicking out a child and telling them that they have to go is going to make other children feel like they're in a safe space, especially if they're boys, because boys are competition, girls are our payment. So if you have all this competition who is in the house and then you kick out someone that they look up to and that they seem to be closer to than they were even to their own father, of course the siblings are going to act out. I know if it was one of my siblings, oh, we be going up against our parents like, what you mean? So I get it. The summer before Craig left, my brother Travis, 4 years Craig's junior, had begun to question his faith in much the same way that Craig had. The church leaders decided to send Travis to Short Creek to reform so that he would become more faithful. Sending children to reform was the church's way of dealing with those who got out of line. Because Travis was younger than Craig, there was still hope for him in the eyes of the priesthood, and this retreat was supposed to bring him back into compliance. On a reform retreat, the boys do manual labor for the priesthood while immersed in the teachings of the church and isolated from their families. They're doing all this work, and let me add, they don't get paid for it. It's a punishment that benefits them. At the end of their time, they are supposed to return to their homes behaving and thinking properly. Travis was placed with a family in southern Utah known for its good priesthood children. The hope was that being in their household would remind him of his role as an obedient and active member of the church. But the reality was that the reform was a harsh environment. Shut off from communication with his family, Travis was mistreated by those in charge of his attitude adjustment. Even without Travis in the house, his doubts began to trickle down to the twins, Justin and Jacob and Brad, all of whom adored their older brothers and used them as examples. The younger boys now displayed their own doubts about the church's role in our family. And mom was powerless as she watched the same fights that Craig and Travis had with our father and mothers happen all over again because you're not doing anything to address the situation. Your answer is to get rid of them and send them to another place where they're treated unfairly. And you just keep the cycle going over and over and over again, but you expect a different result. The departure of Travis and Craig had done little to change Dad's manner over the feeling in the house. Desperate not to lose yet another son, I later learned that Mom had begun confiding her fears to my sister Rachel. That's Rebecca. She was worried that my father had lost his ability to control and unite our family, and she believed we needed outside help. Though we knew things were bad, none of us were aware that Mom was losing faith in our father. All we knew was that every day the problems seemed to get worse and the opinions seemed to grow fewer. Ooh wee. Y'all, okay, I was going to stop here, but it's a Friday, so I'll go ahead and give you another chapter. Chapter 4, In Light and Truth. The prophet can do no wrong. Warren Jeffs. After all the struggles in our home, I long for my mother's pain to subside and for peace to be restored. That previous August, I returned to Alta Academy, a fifth grader. While I wasn't in an upper classroom yet, I was now in my second year with the big kids in the meeting hall for devotional. In addition to being our principal, Warren also taught a number of our classes. One of them was a class in priesthood history, which occurred every day and was considered the most important lesson in school. Uncle Warren would teach us everything about our religion's history, starting from biblical lessons to the Book of Mormon and going through the life of Joseph Smith, as well as the more recent developments in the FLDS. They are drilled from birth about this, which is why it's so hard for so many to leave. It's done intentionally. Uncle Warren would always use priesthood approved scriptures to teach the lessons, and then he would explain them using his own words. Part of the curriculum for older girls was to study In Light and Truth, an FLDS publication. The book was a collection of condensed sermons and teachings by Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Uncle Rulon, and many others. Warren would read the various lessons to the girls, applying his own spin. He would even read the words of his own sermons in such a way as to make us believe that the words were coming directly from God. We were encouraged to listen to tapes of Uncle Warren's important sermons as frequently as we could. Often in school, we would hear these tapes wafting out of the loudspeaker as we went about our day. We also listened to them at home the way our families would listen to music. And as I grew older, I looked to listening to them on my own. I was dedicated to being a good student, even if I didn't entirely understand every aspect of my religion. I searched for answers in the tapes and in my school lessons, rarely asking for help when I felt confused. If I didn't understand something, it was better not to say it aloud than appear to be questioning priesthood principles. She learned that early on not to question anything. Ever since the age of 8 or 9, I had been taking home economics courses along with the rest of the girls, in which we learned the basics of running a household. Taking these courses brought us closer to our ultimate goal, becoming perfect priesthood wives. Kitchen abilities were an extremely important element of our lesson. Y'all, this is crazy. When you really think about it, it's wild. Not to sit here and act like I wasn't in the kitchen at 7 cutting up onions and helping my mama cook, because we're taught very early to cook too. But the fact that this is just girls learning this, like this is their sole purpose, to learn how to cook so you can make sure your priesthood head is fed. Like, come on. Our individual teachers would separate us from the boys and lead us to the huge industrial kitchen just off the meeting hall. There we learned the basic cooking and cleaning skills that would ready us for the large families that would someday be ours. There were also classes in sewing. We all needed to be able to stitch our special church undergarments and the ankle length prairie dresses that were a staple in our wardrobes, and someday our own wedding dress. Most of my dresses were hand me downs from my older sisters. On special occasions like my birthday, mom would sew one just for me, and I look forward to doing such things for my own daughter someday. One afternoon in early December, she's 9, talking about looking forward to doing, was she 9? Either way, she's in the 5th grade talking about looking forward to doing something for her daughters like that one day. One afternoon in early December, it became clear that God was continuing to test my family. I was at school and had just finished enjoying my lunch of a tuna sandwich with an apple when Uncle Warren's assistant, Elizabeth, poked her head into my classroom and summoned me to the principal's office. My legs shook as I followed Elizabeth down the hallway. I've made this journey several times, and it had usually been for a correction. Turning the corner, I found myself holding my breath as I approached Uncle Warren's office. I pushed open the door and nervously exhaled when I saw 5 of my siblings, along with my mother, sitting in Warren's office. Uncle Warren was seated at his desk as always. Mom's brown eyes looked as if she'd been crying, and I knew something serious was going on. I quickly sat down in a chair facing Warren's desk. No one was speaking, which made me even more scared. I could see the confusion and fear on everyone's faces, and my heart began to race. Uncle Warren's low voice cut the silence. I'm delivering a message from the prophet, Warren began in an icy tone. The prophet has lost confidence in your father. He is no longer worthy to hold the priesthood or have a family. Shocked and confused, one of my brothers asked for an explanation. How can that be? After a momentary pause, Uncle Warren glared down at him, his irritation visible from behind his thick eyeglasses. Are you questioning the prophet and his will? No one, especially not a child, could argue with that. Still, we wall kids had trouble accepting things when they didn't seem fair. Just like my brother Craig, we all look for the truth in any given situation. My brother Brad spoke next. Where will we go? He asked timidly. It is up to the prophet to decide, Warren told him. You will no longer be attending school. The silence was deafening as he told us to return to our classrooms and gather our things. Looking at my mother, I saw pain and sadness on her face. We would not be returning to our home or school. Confusion took over my mind. In a daze, my brothers and I filed quietly out of the room, leaving my mother and my older sister Teresa behind with Warren. I felt so ashamed knowing that my classmates were watching me as I collected my belongings. It's just a way to further humiliate them. We hadn't been given a clear explanation as to why Dad had lost the priesthood or what had led to this life altering declaration. We were just to follow the prophet's direction. I was still gaining an understanding of the world I was raised in and the workings of the priesthood. Even though we had always lived to please the prophet and do his will, everything still felt so wrong. How could our father just be taken away from us? Why were they breaking up our family? What about Mother Audrey, Mother Laura, and their kids? Would Dad lose them all as well? The question burning in my mind would go unanswered, and I kept my mouth shut out of fear. Once we gathered our things from our classroom, we went to the meeting room on the main floor and were unceremoniously escorted across the blacktop driveway and through the gate that led to the prophet's home. We were told that we would spend the night there and that in the morning we would leave for southern Utah where my mother had grown up. Staying overnight at home of the prophets made me feel safe and comforted, if only for that moment. I had always dearly loved my visits there. Many of Uncle Ruin's wives had been kind to me, and I loved and looked up to my elder sisters. The drive down to southern Utah the next morning was a blur, and I remember it now more as a collection of images and feelings than actual events. The crunch of the tires or on the freshly fallen snow as we left. The thought that my brothers and I should have been making snowmen in our backyard instead of being packed into the back of the van, wiping the fog off the inside of the van's window and watching our school disappear around the corner. Even if we had been scrambling to get to school on time in our traditional morning rush, I would have felt infinitely happier. None of us knew if we were ever coming back or going to see my dad again. I was a child faced with unspeakable loss, completely confused, with no one giving answers. The thought of that! Rachel and Cassandra had joined us in two of Uncle Ruin's family vans for the 4-hour drive to the prophet's other home in Hilldale. They were there to help us pass time and keep the younger kids entertained. I didn't know then, but Rachel had played a role in mom's decision to involve the prophet in our domestic problems. Don't forget, Rachel's Rebecca. Over time, I learned that both Rachel and Mom believed that our home had become a battleground with innocent children caught in the crossfire. For some time, Mom had been confiding in Rachel her fears about losing more of her sons and had sought her help drafting a letter to the prophet. Meanwhile, Rachel had independently gone to Uncle Rulon for advice. She and Cassandra knew that the previous morning, Mom had gone to see Warren, who'd been acting for his father. To ease the severity of our situation, it had been arranged that my two sisters would accompany us on the long drive south. They tried to play games with us to lighten the mood, but I was too old and too aware to be distracted. During the ride, I searched my mother's face for answers, but but not surprisingly, it offered none. I knew I wasn't to question the prophet or God, but I was so desperate. Will we ever see Dad again? I asked Mom. I don't know, Lisi, she replied, using the nickname pronounced Lisi that I had since I was very young. Put it on a shelf and pray about it. This was Mom's and the FLDS standard response to questions that had no easy answer. Between Craig's departure and the troubles at home, my shelf was already full. Now I worried it would tip over. At the time, I was so focused on my own experience that I didn't stop to think about how that day affected my father, and it was not until years later that we had a chance to talk about it. In the hours before we were gathered in Uncle Warren's office, Dad had been summoned to see the prophet at his home in Salt Lake. He was immediately shown to the prophet's private office, where he found Uncle Rulon and his son Warren. As had become the case in recent years, Warren was there to speak on behalf of his father. Although Uncle Rulon was still officially the prophet, he was in his mid 80s and not as active as he once had been. Warren had taken on many of the traditional responsibilities of the prophet a year earlier. It had been Warren who performed Dad's marriage ceremony to Mother Laura, and here he was once again delivering his father's directives. Taking a seat across from the men on one of the chairs, my father didn't know what to expect as he adjusted himself and waiting to be addressed. Warren did not waste any time getting to the point. The prophet has lost confidence in you as a priesthood man and is taking Sharon and her children away, he blurted out. Why just them? Why not everybody? The words were an assault, and Dad was too overcome by emotion to respond. It seemed like only yesterday that he had been honored with the addition of a third wife. Now, as Warren had bluntly put it, Dad was losing Sharon and all of her children. He sat there listening to Warren speak, and the reality of the situation began to sink in. Dad had been stripped of his priesthood duties as they pertained to Mother Sharon and her children, but Mothers Audrey and Laura would remain under his control. As he sat listening, he wondered how everything could have slipped through his fingers so quickly. Rising to leave, he was too besieged by emotion to speak and left in bewilderment. My father later explained that he felt as if he'd become detached from his body as he heard the prophet's revelation that day. The words had been spoken, but Dad just couldn't make them feel real inside. It is book after grown man being told by another man that their family is no longer theirs. And these guys do not fight it because of what they're taught. They go with it. When he returned home, he found the belongings of Mother Sharon and her children had already been taken away. Mothers Audrey and Laura were shocked by the news. They too had been unhappy, but they never thought it would come to this. In the weeks ahead, Mother Audrey felt a devastating loss. While things had not been working in the house for quite some time, losing Mother Sharon and her children was much more upsetting than she ever imagined. When our two vans arrived at the Prophet's Hilldale home, my mother's brother Robert was waiting for us. He'd been instructed to take us to the Steed family ranch, some 150 miles outside of Short Creek, near Whitstow, Widtsoe, Utah. My heart was momentarily warmed as I watched as I watched his hug seem to give my mother strength. It had been a long time since she lived there, but I sensed that she felt a certain relief to be going home. Since Grandpa Newell's death at the age of 86, many of his sons had cared for the ranch where he had raised his large family. Uncle Robert and his family lived in the main house and had started a home school for their children on the sprawling grounds. The ranch had been in the Steed family for about 80 years, ever since Grandpa Newell settled in 1916 at the tender age of 14. Despite his youth, Grandpa Newell had traveled along with 60 head of cattle to the remote and barren land in southern Utah that his father had homestead, and it was there that he made good on his promise to his father that would establish a fully functioning ranch. He spent hours alone caring for the stock, milking the cows and churning fresh butter, barely making it through that first long, hard winter. But even as the isolating snow and ice cutting through the valley, Newell Steed endured it all in the name of his dream, living a life where he could practice Mormonism as it was originally envisioned by Joseph Smith, a life where he was free to practice plural marriage. Grandpa Newell's belief in the principle of plural marriage first took root when, at the age of 10, he accompanied his father to a clandestine meeting of men still in the Mormon church who continued to embrace the practice in secret. This was in the early days of the work, decades before it was known as the FLDS Church. In time, Grandpa Newell was not only free to practice his religion, he also became one of the most respected members of the FLDS in southern Utah. When the Steed family arrived at a community event, all eyes were on their perfectly styled hair and their attractive homemade clothes. The Steeds were known for their taste in fabrics and their unique trend setting interpretation of the church's mandated dress code. Although there was this rich tapestry of family history at the ranch, I had not spent much time with Uncle Robert and his family. Still, he seemed genuinely happy to see us. I will never forget riding in the back of his white truck with the camper shell on it. The drive to Whitstow seemed to take forever, and a little bud of excitement formed inside me. I had rarely had the opportunity to visit the Steed Ranch since Grandfather Newell's passing in 1988, and despite the acute sadness and confusion I had experienced over the past couple days, I couldn't deny my eagerness to get there. When we arrived, the house looked cozy. The snow covered the ground, and the white picket fence that surrounded the historic wood residence, giving it a homey feel. After such a long emotional journey, it felt good to be received with love by Uncle Robert's many wives and children. Mom's brother was a faithful follower, and he and his family did all that they could to move aside and open a place for us to stay in their home. We were moved by their generosity, but the accommodations were difficult for a family that had been used to more modern living. This was the original home that my mother had grown up in, and it had not been updated. There was no power or central heat. The home was run on a generator and the heat by an old wood burning stove. Uncle Robert had cleared a bedroom for my mother, sisters, and me, but my brothers had to bunk with some of Uncle Robert's sons. Uncle Rulon had allowed my sister Cassandra to stay with us full time, and Rachel traveled to see us when she could. At various points, there was as many as 7 children in some of the rooms. My mother's spirit seemed to lift immediately upon arrival at the ranch. I sensed her relief and joy at being back in her childhood home. Having her and my older sisters close helped us get through this scary and trying period. But there were moments when I longed for my home in Salt Lake and to hear my father's soothing voice leading the family in evening prayer. Even though everyone was willing to adopt us into the family, life was still not easy, especially for Teresa and my brothers. I was young enough not to understand everything that was going on, but they were fully aware of our situation's harsh realities. As we tried to process complex emotions, we couldn't help but feel that Dad had been unjustly dealt with. While those outside our family may have thought that the prophet and Warren were saving us from a father who could not control his family, I never saw it that way. Things were not perfect at home, and something did need to change, but breaking the family apart would not solve the problem. It was just another wound from which our family would never recover. We'd been at the ranch for a few weeks when Mom suddenly went away, leaving us in the care of Cassandra and Teresa. Everything is always done in secret. It's just keeping these people in constant panic mode. While I trusted my older sisters, I was worried about my mother's unexpected and secretive departure. We were told only that she had gone to Hilldale to see the prophet. During her absence, I became so ill I nearly collapsed. Perhaps it was the change of climate or the stress of losing my dad that had me fighting off constant colds and spells of the flu. I never really gotten over the Lyme disease I contracted the previous summer during our camping trip to the mountains, and I often felt weak and tired. Fevers plagued me during repeated bouts of illness, and as the snow and cold of winter set in, I found it impossible to get warm. I walked around much of the time with inflamed tonsils and a general feeling of ill health. Cassandra and Teresa took care of me as best as they could, but the homeopathic remedies of cayenne pepper, garlic, and echinacea could not prevent my deterioration. There were moments when my throat seemed almost completely closed up and my tonsils became severely infected. Even if my mother had been there to take care of me, with no health insurance and no doctors nearby, there was not much more she could have done to help. Nevertheless, I longed for her comfort and presence by my side. At the ranch, we were expected to share in the workload. Our names were placed on the job chart and we worked alongside everyone else. But because I was so sick, it was difficult for me to do my share. We were also required to attend morning lessons with our family members, where we would listen to the taped sermons and teachings of Warren Jeffs. There were days when I felt well enough to ice skate and sled, and I was able to enjoy the big New Year's Eve party when we made homemade candy and played games with our many young cousins. In addition to Uncle Robert's family, my Uncle Lee and his wife Debbie were living at the ranch in a smaller home. Some of my older male cousins shared a bunkhouse just behind the main house where they had been sent from Hilldale by their fathers to help care for the ranch. One of these was my 15-year-old first cousin, Alan Glade Steed. From our first contact that winter, I did not like Alan one bit. He was gangly and awkward, but that didn't stop him from teasing my younger siblings and me because we didn't have a father. Though he probably knew that his words stung, he would remind us with a gleeful smile that we didn't have a priesthood father. We were quick to defend Dad's honor, and it led to many arguments. As a 10-year-old girl, I was very self conscious and insecure. For most of my childhood, I had kept some baby fat, and even though Alan seemed to know it scorched my feelings, he took to calling me a tubba tubba. He seemed to enjoy embarrassing me. One day I had been ecstatic about going ice skating because illness had kept me from many other skating trips. The reservoir on the Steed Ranch was too far from the house to walk, so we would usually drive over. I waited patiently for my brothers and sisters to get ready, and we all rushed outside to pile in the trailer attached to the Allen's four-wheeler. They got in one by one as I waited for my turn to hop on. Just as I stepped toward the trailer, Alan let out a loud, cruel laugh and sped away, throwing me off balance and causing me to hit my head. Tears stung my eyes, but rather than act like a baby, I stood back up and shouted, "Stop," and asked him to please return for me. He simply went on laughing, not even hearing my words, as he left me behind in the snow. Although he was particularly mean to me, I wasn't Alan's only target. My younger brother Caleb and I were in the milk shed one day watching a few of the Steed siblings milk the cows. I was feeling shaky after another bout of illness, and the bitter cold winter air was hard to ignore. Alan, with a menacing smile, started to spray us with the hose he was using and continued until our clothes were soaked. I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't. Alan was a little jerk from the beginning, and let me guess, there was no discipline. Caleb was bolder than I and picked up a nearby shovel and he threw some manure at Alan. Alan left enraged, telling Robert that Caleb had tossed manure at him while he was working and claiming that the attack had been unprovoked. I couldn't even stand seeing Alan at the dinner table in the evenings. The Steeds ran their home much like a business, with meals served at set times and in shifts. Those who found a seat at one of the two dining tables in the kitchen ate first. When the rations ran out, there was often nothing more to eat. Unlike Salt Lake and even Short Creek, Woodstow was a kind of ghost town with no grocery stores in close proximity. The town and surrounding area had long been abandoned due to lack of water. Our nearest neighbor was about 15 miles away. Much of the food was harvested from the big vegetable garden on the property and pickled at and stored for us throughout the winter. Sometimes we would go to bed hungry. The run ins with Alan were not the only problems between the Steed kids and the Wall children. After Mom had been gone for a while, a dispute broke out between my brothers and some of Uncle Robert's sons. Despite the fact that both families belonged to the same religion, our father had raised us differently than Uncle Robert raised his family, and these disparities became a point of contention. With Mom temporarily out of the picture, some of Uncle Robert's older sons took it upon themselves to impose their more rigid form of LDS observance on my brothers. They were constantly proclaiming their faith in the prophet and quickly became impatient with my brother's apparent lack of conviction. The Wild Boys resented the uninvited tutorials, and Cassandra and Teresa were forced to step in to mediate. By January of 1997, the benefits of the arrangement had begun to erode. Personalities were conflicting, and the harsh winter in such a remote place was becoming problematic. While there had been some fun and lasting memories during my short stay at the Steed Ranch, I was ready to go home. Just as we started to wither in these frustrations, news came that changed everything. Uncle Rulon had decided that Dad had acknowledged his shortcomings and repented so that his priesthood could be fully restored. The thought of a warm hug from the man whom I had missed so dearly filled me with hope. At last, it felt as though my family was being glued back together. Home had never been perfect, but it was the only place I wanted to be. And that is where we're ending it. Alan is a jerk. So it doesn't surprise me now knowing some of the things that she went through. I'm interested in hearing the rest of her story though. You guys let me know what you thought of these two chapters that we just read. Like the video as it helps the channel. And if you got any left, go ahead and hype me up. Until next time, peace.